Welcome into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Check out fullpresscoverage.com for all their great podcasts, including this one, and lots of articles and other great content surrounding pretty much every sport you could imagine. I think they might have some stuff on cricket and field hockey professionally. I'm not sure, but I wouldn't doubt it. But we are here to focus on basketball, and the NBA trade deadline is rapidly approaching. It is in 2 days, and there is just an absolute flurry of rumors going on. So we're going to get you caught up with the most recent rumors and innuendo. Sap, anything that is particularly intriguing to you off the bat?
Well, first of all, you have to have Adrian Wojnarowski on notifications on Twitter, right? Because he's the guy that will break the news. He seems to know more about the trades, what happens in the draft before even executives do. I don't know if he has everybody's phone tapped, but Woj does a great job with this. It's going to be interesting to see because I wonder how much of a seller's market it is, because with the expanded playoffs, and again, seeded 7 through 10 are 4 teams that play either 1 or 2 games. So you could technically say there's 20 teams that make the playoffs out of 30, which leaves 10 teams out. And many of those 10 teams are in contention for one of those spots. So how many teams will be selling? It appears, obviously, the Houston Rockets, who are god-awful, the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are god-awful, Orlando Magic, another really poor team. They're going to be in the seller's market. So the group of players that are available isn't all that deep. So now you have to try to match those players up with what the contending teams need. So that's going to be the interesting connection to see what happens. Closer to home, are the Celtics going to make a move for the first time since 2015 at the trade deadline? I mean, it's been since then, since they made a trade deadline move. That's when they brought in Isaiah Thomas. You hear all the rumors that Danny Ainge is in on everything. But sometimes I think Danny Ainge is the guy who wants to buy a house. He's secured funding from the bank. He goes to look at all the houses, but he wants to pay less for that house. He needs to have all the work done. He wants a turnkey type of acquisition. He doesn't want to do any work on the house. It's got to be near work. It's got to have 3 acres of land, and it just doesn't work out that way. You don't always get what you want. Didn't the Rolling Stones say something like that at one point?
I tried. We were
I
involved.
Tried. Yeah,
I was trying to get the house.
I
walked into the house.
Yeah. Just didn't work out. I mean, I want to date Scarlett Johansson. That's not going to happen. So, I can go out there and tweet out that, I'm interested in Scarlett Johansson. Not sure if she's interested in me, but we'll go from there. So we'll see what the Celtics do. And again, what the contending teams do. I know you're probably sitting on pins and needles that the Celtics don't move Marcus Smart at the trade deadline, which I would do if I were the Celtics, but obviously you wouldn't.
Well, it depends on the deal, right? I mean, the biggest deal that's been rumored and the one that seems most likely to come to fruition is a deal involving Aaron Gordon of the Orlando Magic. He's formally requested a trade. So it does seem like even Woj has said he's very likely to be moved. The Celtics obviously are interested in his services, as a lot of teams are. He's a good player who has another 2 years on his deal and is still young, so still has some plenty of prime years left. So it makes sense that the market for him would be robust. In talking specifically about the deal that's rumored between the Magic and the Celtics, it would be Marcus Smart, 2 first-round picks, and maybe either Romeo Langford or Aaron Nesmith in exchange for Aaron Gordon and Evan Fournier. Fournier is a free agent after this year. He's averaging 19 points a game this year. Good player, probably best suited as a bench scorer on a good team. The problem I have with that trade, Sap, is that it's not so much that Marcus Smart would be involved, because I think you can't really consider anybody untouchable, but it's like shuffling deck chairs in the Titanic. Mm-hmm. If the shuffling also infuriated the entire fan base of Boston, because Marcus Smart, he's probably the second most popular player here to Tatum. I think if you ask a lot of people, he's actually the most popular player on the Celtics in terms of just like people love him. Celtics fans love him.
He's polarizing, right? Because there's a group that love him, and then there's a group that don't love him.
I think it's more polarizing in the media. Honestly,
it's very polarizing in the media. Like, you love him. I don't. I would move.
I think amongst fans, he's very popular.
People love him. I think if you're at a Celtics game and there's fans, which there hasn't been that in a year, and there will be soon enough, although very limited number, you see a lot of the 36 T-shirts. I think it's laughable that if they move Marcus Smart, there'd be more grieving from Celtic fans about that move than there was grieving when Mookie Betts got traded by the Red Sox a year ago, right? Mookie Betts, in my opinion, is the best all-around Red Sox player of my lifetime, and I'm 57 years old. Marcus Smart's a nice piece, best suited to be maybe the fifth best player on your championship-driven team. He's had to elevate this year because, quite frankly, Tatum and Brown are still really good, and Kemba's in and out of the lineup. But I think there would be more grieving among Celtic fans if Marcus Smart gets traded, more so than Red Sox fans grieved when Mookie Betts was traded, which I found kind of laughable, right? But I would move them.
It's hard to rationalize the Red Sox fans. I mean,
they're just like cold and distant at this point. They're like, yeah, whatever. Trade Mookie Betts, the best player I've ever seen. Helped us win, a World Series in 2018.
Well, it's because people are just constantly thinking the sky's gonna, fall if you're a Red Sox fan. So it's like, yeah, this is par for the course. Trade our best player, get nothing in return. Why not?
And the Celtic fans are like, Marcus Smart, you can't possibly trade him. That would turn the entire team upside down, which, by the way, is a losing record right now. They have a losing record in games Marcus Smart's played this year. He hasn't really had that big of an impact. I don't think he's the player he was 2 years ago. I think he's regressed as a player.
That Celtics fans they want to make a trade, but they don't want to trade any of their own players. So that's fair. But as far as this specific proposed trade goes, I like Aaron Gordon as a player. Swapping him and Marcus Smart, do you actually get any better?
Probably not. No, you don't. I think Smart is supposed to be a better defensive player. Look, he was first team all NBA defense last year. He's not playing at the same level this year, whether it be from the injury or whatever the case may be. It's not the same defender he's been in the past.
I remember he had COVID. I know he came back and played in the bubble after he had COVID. So it's been a year, but he did have COVID. So
he did. I mean, that's something I don't want to weigh into because that virus can affect people.
No one seems to know.
Multiple ways. No one knows. There could be, Lamar Jackson played better after COVID. Cam Newton played worse after COVID. I don't know how you quantify all of that, but I think Aaron Gordon is a player who's intriguing because he's 6'8". He's, been spectacular in the dunk contest. But they both come from that same, what I would now call an infamous 2014 draft, right? Because you remember that was Brad Stevens' first year. He was hired in 2013. Everyone is on board, tank. And the top two players in the draft were Andrew Wiggins, who's been a disappointment since he's been in the league, and Jabari Parker, who I was reading stories about in Sports Illustrated 2 years before that draft that this guy is going to be the next great player. Well, that did never happen because
I thought both of them were can't miss. So
they look like can't miss guys, right? And then Joel Embiid was the wild card because he was a big guy who had some back issues, and now he's clearly the best player from that draft. Aaron Gordon was the fourth pick. Embiid was the third pick with Philadelphia, and then Dante Exum went fifth to Utah, and then Marcus Smart went sixth, and Julius Randle went seventh. Of those seven players, the player I liked the most coming out was Julius Randle, who was an all-star this year. I know you love Marcus Smart. Embiid's the most talented guy in that group by far.
Yeah, it's not even close.
But a lot of disappointments in there, including Aaron Gordon, who is a guy who's, he's shooting 40% from three this year, which is outstanding, but that's 8, 9, 10 percentage points higher than what he normally does from three. So is it just a small sample size? He still only shoots 65% from the free throw line. That's a weird combination.
Yeah, that's no good.
I mean, he's athletic, but what exactly does bring
I think there seems to be consensus amongst teams that are trying to trade for him that he can be better than what he's shown in Orlando because of how they use him. And I think from what I've read about the Celtics in terms of their interest in him is they like that because he's so athletic, he can be a versatile defender and maybe a playmaker sort of in that point forward role. I know a lot of teams view him to play a similar type role as what Draymond Green played on and still sort of plays on the Warriors. Not obviously as good as Draymond Green. I mean, no one's saying that, but that he hasn't showcased his full ability playing on what's been, mediocre to bad Orlando Magic teams. So I think that's the interest in him. But again, if you're talking about the Celtics getting him and it's a Marcus Smart swap, I just don't see what the point of that would be. You're trading a guy who is obviously a locker room leader for a guy in Aaron Gordon who's, maybe they're equivalent players. Some people might think Gordon's better. Some people might think Smart's better. It shouldn't impact the trajectory of your season one way or the other. So then why do it?
Probably not, other than Smart could be a free agent at the end of this year. and Gordon has an additional year left on his contract, so you're kicking the can down the road. And you talk about Marcus Smart being a locker room leader. Do we know that, or is he a locker room nuisance? Do we know that? I don't know if I can
think we
believe
know it
100%
definitively one way or the other. But I do think he, the team always, speaks of him glowingly and says, he's our leader, he's the heart and soul. So, I mean, unless they're just, complete BS. I've heard
or
them
they're
say
frightened
that.
of him, right? Because he does seem
possibly
like to be the guy that will pick a chair up and throw it at someone. I mean, he's what makes him an intriguing player, more your type of player than mine. But what makes him an intriguing player is he busts his ass out there, and he's very emotional. Well, that can work both ways. So, look, Danny Ainge hasn't made a deal at the trade deadline. At that point, President Obama was our president. So, is he going to all of a sudden step up and make this deal in the next 2 days? I find it highly doubtful. And the thing is, maybe you're better off waiting till the off season to use that trade exception when you've got more time. You can get the piece you want. The only thing is, if you go out and get Aaron Gordon, you will have him for next year. You could maybe sell him on your program and sign him to a long-term contract. I just think he's a average to above average player. Like you said, I think you're trading Marcus Smart, who has his good qualities and bad qualities, for another guy who has some good qualities and bad qualities. It's a lateral move. It's
right.
just you're getting a guy who's a little more, maybe a little more versatile, bigger, more athletic guy. So,
but it's a lateral move, and you're sending them 2 first-round picks, for the pleasure of doing business with them.
Isn't that where Evan Fournier comes in though? Because that would be part of the deal if you bring.
Yeah,
Fournier
I guess,
here.
but he's a free agent after the end of the season. So again, unless you really have designs on paying Evan Fournier big money after the season, I just, if you add Gordon and Fournier to this team, maybe they get out of the first round, but do they beat let's say the best opponent they could play in the second round in terms of what they'd want would be the Bucks, and do they even beat the Bucks with that? So I don't know. Again, it's that old metaphor, the shuffling deck chairs in the Titanic thing. If you're going to make a trade, then make sure it's improving your trajectory, not being a lateral move. And I'd say if you're trading Smart for Gordon and you're kicking in the 2 first-round picks, it's a negative move because you're giving up assets for a player who is equivalent.
You're just getting one more year of the player, right? Because the contract is a year longer than the one Smart has. There's other players available, but they don't seem to really fit. I mean, I think of all the players that are rumored to be traded, maybe Victor Oladipo with Houston has the highest ceiling. I mean, he's a multiple-time All-Star. He's a guy who's still averaging 20 points per game. Free agent at the end of the year,
looking for big money.
Right.
So it's going to be, how do you gauge trading assets for somebody who's going to be wanting a new contract? It's also the same situation as John Collins in Atlanta, who's been, rumored in trades for a couple of months now. He's a free agent at the end of the year. He wants max money. So there's a lot of guys who, you have to sort of weigh the pros and cons of, is it worth adding them and then possibly losing them at the end of the year? But Aaron Gordon isn't and the Celtics aren't the only team interested in him. The Nuggets are supposedly really in on Aaron Gordon, as are the Portland Trailblazers. So all these sort of like teams that are below that top tier in their conference, thinking maybe Aaron Gordon can elevate them to that. I'm dubious, but I guess it all depends on what the exchange is, right?
All those somewhat contending teams in the West, they all have one thing in common. They need a good wing defender, because if they're going to get to the finals, which I don't think Denver and Portland can get there, but obviously they're trying to build that. They need a wing defender to combat LeBron James in the postseason. I don't think Gordon's an elite defender. He's very athletic. Maybe he gets charged up playing on a contending team. The guy's been in the league 7 years. He's played in 5 playoff games. Now, you can fault him for part of that. Maybe he hasn't been able to elevate his team. Maybe he's just a above average player. Sometimes you go to a new place, all of a sudden you get a new lease on life, and you can contribute more to your team. So he's a fine player. The only benefit I see is he does have 1 year left on his contract, so you have a year to sell him on your program. But then if he's looking for max dollars or close to max dollars, because he's never been first, second, or third team All-NBA, and I don't think he's ever going to sniff that. No. I'm never a big fan of paying great money for good players. It just doesn't seem to work. I mean, there are going to be cheaper options down the road for players that are somewhat similar to Aaron Gordon, right? So why spend all that money on him?
Yeah, I think it depends on the market, right? Like everybody agreed that Gordon Hayward was very overpaid to go to
Mm-hmm.
Charlotte, but they don't get free agents there, so they
Mm-hmm.
kind of have to overpay. So I don't really have an issue for it. If you have the cap space and you're a team that's in a small market like Charlotte, I have no problem with them, overpaying for somebody. But yeah, for like the Celtics, it makes a lot less sense. Even for like a team like the Blazers or the Nuggets, it makes less sense. For a team that's like a bottom feeder like Charlotte, whoever you can get in, you should get in.
Yeah, you got Terry Rozier, you got Gordon Hayward, and then you draft LaMelo Ball, and now you got three nice pieces to build on, even though LaMelo Ball is going to be out for the rest of the year. You can even make that case for the Celtics when they signed Kemba Walker. Maybe it was a reactionary move after losing Kyrie Irving. They wanted to get someone who was somewhat similar to Kyrie Irving, a poor man's version of Kyrie Irving, and they still paid him, I think, too much money. That's
Yeah.
my point on all of this. Don't pay max money or close to max money for a guy who's, a multiple-time All-Star, Kemba Walker, very good. But those small point guards, once they reach 30, 31, they do tend to break down. We've seen that
Yeah.
throughout the history of the NBA.
They do. So, I'm going to throw out some names that have been rumored just so we can catch everybody up on sort of the latest stuff. Not just because I name a name doesn't mean this person is going to be traded by any means, but it's just what's been being talked about right now. So we mentioned Aaron Gordon. Basically everybody on the Orlando Magic is available as they are bottoming out. So of the guys that could be available from Orlando, Sap, if you're a team, who are you most interested in? Fournier, Gordon, Vucevic, Terrence Ross? Is there a particular piece that you think that can be had from the team that's more intriguing to you than another player?
Vucevic, he's an all-star, right? He's a 2010 guy. He's been a load this year. I think he's clearly their best player. He offers you something that's kind of a rarity in the NBA, a big, although I think there's going to be some bigs moving around to go to contending teams at the trade deadline and maybe beyond with the buyout market. Vucevic is the best player on Orlando without question. I think if you could go get him, now you've added, I think, an impact piece, certainly more so than Aaron Gordon or Evan Fournier.
So are you talking more along the lines of a team like the Celtics or the Nuggets or the
Sure.
Blazers that we talked about getting him? Because could you see that actually making a difference come postseason? If they say the Blazers get him and they don't have to give up, say they give up like Zach Collins and some picks, whatever, to make the money work. They don't give up a piece they don't give up like a CJ McCollum, somebody that they, that is really important to their rotation.
Oh, absolutely.
Is that good enough to get them potentially to the finals?
They still have an issue that they don't have a real true wing defender. And if they're playing the Lakers in the second round of the playoffs, who the hell's combating LeBron James? It's certainly not going to be Carmelo Anthony. It's not going to be Nikolai Vucevic. They don't have that component. I think that's a big key for a lot of these teams. It almost feels like, when you're constructing a football team, let's go get a cornerback because we got to stop these high-powered passing attacks. Well, if you're in the Western Conference, you got to get a good wing defender to at least make LeBron James work to control the game. He's going to control the game anyway. That's why the Clippers are an intriguing team that could beat the Lakers because they have two of those in Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. But Vucevic, if he's available, I think he jumps up to being the best player available if that's the case, right? He's an all-star.
Yeah, it's just a matter of, I agree with you. It's a matter of if a team that is in in the second tier, not the Clippers, the Lakers, the Nets, the Bucks, if they're able to get him without having to give up something, a franchise cornerstone, how high can he elevate a good team? Can he elevate a good team to being a great team? That's the question. If he goes to the Nuggets, the Celtics, the Blazers, these teams, the Heat, these teams I mentioned, I'm not necessarily saying they're in on him, but what's sort of the ceiling he could vault a team to?
Can they win one more round because of him? To get a player that elevates you from, say, borderline winning the first round to all of a sudden going to the finals, that's a true impact player. There's very few of those players in the league. Nikolai Vucevic, if he goes to the Celtics, maybe he guarantees they win the first round, but could they beat Milwaukee in the second round, even with him on the roster? Probably not. If he goes to Portland, maybe they win a first-round series, but then in the Western Conference semis, they're playing the Lakers or the Clippers, and they can't match up with them, and they lose anyway. So that's the delicate balance because you're going to have to give up some capital to get him and then down the road pay him because he's still a very effective player, but, it's a very difficult move. This is different than, say, in 2004 when the Pistons went out and got Rasheed Wallace, right? They got Rasheed Wallace, and he solidified
That was the
everything
missing piece.
for the Pistons. Absolutely. And they didn't give up all that much. In fact, most of the guys they gave up ended up being released. It was kind of a, let's just take a bunch of trash, send it, get Rasheed Wallace, because we're just working the books at this point. That was the difference between them winning the championship and not winning the championship. I don't think they beat the Lakers that year without Rasheed Wallace.
He was the missing piece, for sure.
I don't even know if they get to the finals without Rasheed Wallace. So that type of player who I think was better than anybody that's available now, but also it was a different time where you could make that type of move. Now it's a little bit more difficult.
Right, because you're, combating super teams in the Nets.
Right.
Or the Lakers aren't quite a super team, but, they do have 2 top 5 players. So Vucevic, again, everybody in the Magic basically is available for the right price because they're going nowhere. And they're 2 young stars that they want to build around, if you want to even call them stars. Young talents, Markelle Fultz and Jonathan Isaac are both out for the year. So those guys, that's who they see as their future. The rest of the team, I think they have no problem with parting ways with anybody as long as it's for the right price. The Kings are in a similar situation where they're basically saying, take a look at our roster. Basically everybody but De'Aaron Fox is available. That means Harrison Barnes, Buddy Hield, Marvin Bagley, who's been a pretty big disappointment as the second overall pick, hurt all the time. Rashawn Holmes, who you saw dominate the Celtics the other night. All those guys, good players, could help a team. Maybe, I don't know if Bagley could, but, you're betting on potential there. Hield, Holmes, Barnes, all guys that I think a playoff team would want to have.
Yeah, especially, Harrison Barnes is the name we keep hearing. He's been tied to, it appears to be, every team because, again, he's a 3-and-D guy, which the league has a bunch of. But you need 2 on every team, right? Because that's what you're going to be defending. If you go up against the Clippers in a playoff series, you need 2 3-and-D guys, right? Because you got Kawhi and Paul George to deal with. If you're going up against the Lakers, you need multiple 3-and-D guys just to combat with LeBron James. So I think Harrison Barnes is someone that can be moved at the trade deadline. Would the Celtics be interested in him? I'm not quite sure about that because he is going to be a free agent at the end of the year. Do you want a rental when you're really not a contender? Whereas Aaron Gordon offers you an extra year of a contract, which I think adds some value to that. But I think the contending teams are going to be looking for Harrison Barnes. Portland and Denver are 2 teams that come to mind, right? They need that type of player. So maybe they're on board with Harrison Barnes at the deadline.
Does Buddy Hield intrigue you at all?
He's such a good shooter, and every time he plays the Celtics, he destroys them. The Celtics should just go get him because I think he's worth 2 wins against the Celtics. And if he's on your team, then the Celtics would beat Sacramento twice a year. So that's something to build on. And it seems like he loves playing at TD Garden for some reason. He has huge games there, but he's kind of a defensive liability, right? Great shooter, streaky shooter more than a great shooter. So I think that he's someone that can add a piece, but I think he would be a better bench guy, right?
A team that's supposedly in on Buddy Hield is your Los Angeles Lakers, Sep. How do you feel about the fit there?
They need scoring, Chet. They don't have Anthony Davis for another few weeks. They don't have LeBron for 3 to 4 weeks. Scoring's been an issue with them anyway. They're still the best defensive team in basketball. What
would you give up for him then?
Oh, boy. THT, they don't really have any draft capital, right? They use most of that to get
No, they have their 2029 pick or something.
Yeah, they gave up everything to get Anthony Davis, rightfully so. Kuzma, I want to see what Kuzma can do when he's like the lead dog or the second best player on the team.
So who would you rather have on the Lakers,
scary.
Kuzma or Buddy Hield?
Kuzma because of his height. He's 6'10", and I think he's growing a little bit as a player. They're around the same age because they both had long college careers. So they're not getting better, either one of them, right? They are what they are.
Yeah.
They're not like Aaron Gordon's like the same age as those guys. He's been in the league longer. So I think that's, again, as the term you used, shuffling the lawn deck chairs on the Titanic. It's like you take one or not the other. I would prefer Victor Oladipo over Buddy Hield. And I think Oladipo is going to get moved. But again, he's a free agent at the end of the year. What would you have to give to Houston? You don't have draft capital if you're the Lakers. That's a problem.
No, and that's all Houston's looking for is draft capital.
That's all.
They're trying to. They don't want players. Unless it's a guy who has upside. They're not trading.
And who do the Lakers have that Houston would want? Montrezl Harrell may get moved. at the trade
Yeah,
deadline.
Harrell, and that's a good that brings me to the next person that is in a rumor with the Lakers, Sap, which is Terry Rozier for Montrezl Harrell, an even 1-for-1 swap.
Sign me up.
We know
for
that the
Laker guys.
Hornets really wanted Montrezl Harrell. He rejected their bigger contract offer to go to the Lakers, so I'm sure he would not be pleased with that trade. But that's something that's been out there, that a Rozier for a Harrell swap. I'm sure that the Hornets would feel comfortable doing that because they have sort of a logjam at guard there.
Mm-hmm.
But with the Lakers, their issue is size, right? So if they get rid of one of their bigs, you have to. Then you're kind of banking on bringing in somebody in the buyout market.
That's what's probably going to happen, whether it be Whiteside from Sacramento. Drummond is now being rumored to the Lakers once that happens with a buyout, unless Cleveland's going to be stubborn and try to not do anything to help the Lakers. And JaVale McGee, well, yeah, I mean, they're not playing the guy, so, it's almost like do something with him at this point. I think he would help the Lakers. Yeah, if the Lakers could turn Montrezl Harrell into Terry Rozier and then end up with Drummond, I think they'd really improve their team. They would bring more scoring. They'd bring more size. Now you'd have, Rozier and Schroeder as your backcourt, which is kind of a weird backcourt because Rozier's a combo guard.
Backcourt.
Talk about a streaky backcourt. Yeah, when they're on, lights out. Then LeBron goes back to his more natural position, a small forward, but still things run through him anyway. He's so damn versatile. You could do whatever you want with him. And then you have AD at the 4, and you could start Drummond at the 5. That's a pretty good starting 5, right? And I think Rozier would be on his best behavior with LeBron. He'd look at a chance to win a championship. And look, Rozier had a lot of really great playoff memories with the Celtics. One of them was not Game 7 against the Cavaliers in the 2018 Eastern Conference Finals, but the team kind of imploded and fell under the weight of the expectations in that game. But I would do that in a heartbeat.
So you have no problem with the Lakers offering Harrell in any sort of trade?
I get the feeling, Jet, that Harrell's a pain in the ass on every team he's been on. I kind of get that, right? I mean, it didn't last with the Clippers. I don't know if it's not working in L.A. He's an energy guy, right? But he's 6'6", maybe 6'7".
He's also a clutch sports guy, so there's, that connection to LeBron there.
Yeah, that's an issue. Maybe Tristan Thompson ends up going from the Celtics to the Lakers. He's also a clutch guy. If the Celtics
not helping the Lakers
move on from, probably not, at that point. But how much are you helping them? Tristan Thompson seen better days, most likely. So there's going to be so many moves made. And I think you're going to see some of these contending teams. You will find out, especially about the injured players. If Brooklyn sits tight, then KD's coming back and he's going to be fine. If the Lakers don't do anything drastic, that AD and LeBron are going to come back and be fine. If they make a major move, especially the Lakers, you're going to have to scratch your head and say, maybe this injury to Anthony Davis is a little more serious than we think, right? Because he's been out for 5-6 weeks.
Call your shot, Sap. Do you think the Lakers are going to make a trade, yes or no?
I think they will. The Harrell for Rozier trade makes sense to me. And also, I think they have a pretty proactive front office. I mean, the last 2 off seasons, they've been incredibly proactive. I mean, they had a championship team last year and decided to move on from Rondo and Dwight Howard. I would have kept those guys, although I think they have a very short shelf life as well, right? I think they just kind of rub teammates the wrong way. So they went with Schroeder and Gasol. Gasol looks calcified at this point, unless he's just saving it for the postseason. I have no idea. But I was also not happy that they let go of JaVale McGee, who was a great chemistry guy in addition of being a damn good defender, right? I mean, you remember in the playoffs last year, he was like leading the cheers on the bench, even in games he wasn't playing, because in certain situations they wouldn't play him much because it wasn't a good matchup. Sometimes leave well enough alone rather than making all these moves. But I think they'll be active in this because, look, what's the shelf life for the Lakers? I mean, as great as LeBron is, he's 36. After this year, he has 2 years left on his contract. That may be the end for him, or maybe he plays elsewhere. At some point, we'll talk about that on the podcast. I dropped a column about that today,
right?
Full press coverage. But, so the Lakers have to be all in this year, next year, and the following year, and then pay the consequences after that.
Yeah, I actually think that could be, advantageous for opposing GMs because, the Lakers are sort of they have this short window and you can really hold their feet to the fire and say, if this is the piece you feel like you really need to get over the top or to repeat, then, maybe add a little sweetener here. We don't know. You don't have a first round pick until 2040, but we'll take that first round pick from you. So,
Danny Ainge might do that. He loves those future picks.
You can really sort of, I think, if the Lakers are locked in on a player or two, I think if you're the opposing GM that you need to hold firm and get as much as you can, because the Lakers are in the mode where they need to win now. They don't have time to waste.
Right. And what do they have to offer? They have no draft capital, right? So you got
they have Kuzma, Harrell, and Horton Tucker, and that's about it. In terms of players that might intrigue other teams that they could conceivably give up that wouldn't really kill them. I mean, they obviously can't give up. They can't give up LeBron or AD, and they can't really give up Schroeder.
No, he's their third best player. And then you got KCP, who was good in the playoffs last year. It's totally
another clutch
this
guy.
Year.
Another clutch guy. They're not trading all those guys away. No, there's a reason they're on the Lakers. So we'll see. But you're thinking they're going to make a move? I
do.
I'm hoping that if they do, another team, really does hold their feet to the fire and gets as much, extracts as much as possible from them. So let's go for some.
That's what a good GM should do.
Let's go for some more rumors, Sap. Kyle Lowry has been yes, no. He's available. He's not available. He's available. He's not available. The latest rumor is that he wants to play for a contending team, or he wants some sort of contract assurance, whether it be from Toronto, because he's a free agent at the end of the year, or whatever team he gets traded to. The two teams talked about the most are Miami and Philadelphia. He's from Philadelphia. He fits into the Miami culture really well. It's just a matter of what would those teams be willing to give up. But it seems like Lowry would accept the trade to either of those two teams because the Raptors aren't going to screw him and send him to a bad team. Tyler Hero is who they want. Miami doesn't necessarily want to give him up. They'd rather give up Duncan Robinson and Precious Achimwa, their rookie this year. As far as Philadelphia goes, their rookie this year, Tyrese Maxey, is who they're offering in a trade. Do you think Kyle Lowry gets moved?
Yeah, I do. And I think partly because he's been perhaps the most popular player in their history, right? With Vince Carter, DeMar DeRozan, or Kyle Lowry. Those are the three most popular players. I mean, Kawhi's the best player to ever play for the Raptors, and in 1 year he delivered a championship. But I think they'll be fair to him and move him if they're not interested in signing him long term. He's 36, but he reminds me of Chris Paul. He's like the poor man's Chris Paul. Like I think he'd play several more years because he plays with his mind and his heart, and it's not about athleticism all the time with Kyle Lowry. Yeah, I think they would move him. If I'm Miami, I make a move because you put Lowry with Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. That's a pretty damn good big three, right? And
you offer Hero
in a way that it's a tough, I would. And I know Hero, he had a great run in the postseason last year. You can't fall in love with players. You can fall in like with players. I would prefer to give up Duncan Robinson, yes, rather than Tyler Hero. But to get a player like Kyle Lowry, especially if you can be proactive, and as soon as you get him, you talk and say, we're going to give you a contract extension, because players love playing in Miami, right? And I'm sure Lowry's a player that would like to play in Miami with that culture, with that winning culture that they have, and playing with Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. Also, Philadelphia, you mentioned, because that's his hometown. Man, Philly would be scary if they got him.
Right,
because
so
he would add that
what's the better
toughness
fit?
that they don't have. Philadelphia. It is, because you've got Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid, Tobias Harris. You've got Doc Rivers as your coach, although I don't want to shortchange Eric Spoelstra. He actually has more titles than Doc Rivers. But that Philadelphia team, he would be perfect for them, right? I thought Chris Paul could have went there in the offseason. They need a ballsy leader because they don't have that. Ben Simmons is a very docile, laconic type player, very talented. Joel Embiid's, somewhat of a crazy guy, but so talented. Kyle Lowry, I think, could pull all those pieces together and make them a true title contender. At that point, I think they could play Brooklyn very tough in the Eastern Conference Finals if they got Kyle Lowry.
To me, he's the most interesting player in the whole deadline because of the two teams he's rumored to, right? In that he's good enough, and the way the style he plays fits so perfectly into what either of those two teams would want, and that he could really impact the race for the NBA championship because of the teams that are interested in him. If Miami is able to get him and not give up Tyler Hero, that's a huge coup for Miami. If Philadelphia is able to get him, that's a huge coup for Philly. But Philly doesn't have the same assets, so it's if Miami offers Hero, it's a done deal. The Raptors would take it in a heartbeat. I think but they've been reluctant to do it. So
I would do it because, again,
it's if you think they can win the championship with that team, then do you think they could? They went to the finals obviously last year. It was weird because in a bubble. Is that team with if say you send Hero out, Lowry in, can that team win the championship?
I don't think they can win the championship. They could probably get to the Eastern Conference Finals, but then they would have pieces in place to go forward. Now the key is extending Lowry for 3 years, whatever the case might be. I know he's getting old, but if you have him, Butler, Adebayo, and then if there's any money available, I think you can attract a free agent or two because players like to play in Miami. There's no state tax, but also who the hell wouldn't want to be in Miami, right? So I think that he could be the bridge to next year when the Heat could really add that final piece to get there with Brooklyn and Philadelphia and Milwaukee. And then you'd have kind of a big four in the East unless, the Celtics crash the party and do some things in the offseason to improve. But Philly would scare the hell out of me if they got Kyle
So Philly
Lowry.
could win the championship if they got him, in your mind?
They could, absolutely. Because now you got a point guard who's got championship DNA. He's not going to shrink in the moment. He should have been the Finals MVP 2 years ago. I know Kawhi won it. Never. I mean, he's as ballsy as they come. Ben Simmons, I think, would be kind of free of not necessarily having to run the team because, he's got the skill set, but not necessarily the personality. I always think of the point guard like the quarterback. Kyle Lowry reminds me of a guy who, would be a damn good quarterback in the NFL, like Chris Paul. They've got that mindset.
Either of those teams would be a bear defensively adding.
Yeah.
I mean, they're already really good defensively, and he's, a top-tier defender because of the way he plays. I mean, he's not as fast as everybody else, but he draws a lot of charges. Holy moly, does he draw a lot of charges.
He's smart out there. I mean, could you picture a 7-game series against Brooklyn where he's checking Kyrie Irving? And look, there's no stopping Kyrie Irving, but he would go down swinging, right? And then, if you're Miami, you got Jimmy Butler. He's not going to stop Kevin Durant, but he's going to certainly give it an effort, or at least he's going to do the same thing with James Harden. So, the East all of a sudden would look really, really tough if Kyle Lowry goes to one of those two places.
Yeah, so I think that's why it's so intriguing. So you're saying, if you're Philly, in your mind, Sap, you do whatever it takes to get him in there. Offer picks, offer your young, Tyrese Maxey. Don't hold back.
Yep. No, go for it because you're not going to obviously send Embiid, Simmons, or Tobias Harris. That's your big three.
Yeah.
And now you'd have a big four with Kyle Lowry, and then of course you got Seth Curry. Is a great 3-point shooter, and you get Danny Green, who just keeps winning championships. I mean, he's won championship the last DNA, 2 years,
right? Yeah.
He just keeps showing up. He's turning into the modern day Robert Horry, right?
He is.
He won in San Antonio. He won in Toronto. He won with the Lakers. Maybe the Lakers need him back. They shouldn't have let him go. He didn't play great, but he was, part of a championship team. But yeah, I would, as a basketball fan, I'd love to see Kyle Lowry in Philadelphia because he's from there. He understands the culture of the city because that's a great basketball city, Philadelphia. I think they would embrace that team even more if he's
from there and he went to college there. He's a Villanova guy. He grew up in Philadelphia. Yeah. He's one of their favorite sons, as you would say, in Philadelphia. So
absolutely.
I think it'll be really, really interesting to see what ends up happening with Kyle Lowry because the Raptors are on a 9-game losing streak. They just lost to the Rockets, who had a 20-game losing streak. They're not going anywhere. It doesn't seem like they aren't going in a completely different direction. So if they can extract any value for Kyle Lowry, I think that's the move to make. And those two teams, rightly so, are very interested in his services. So we'll see what happens there. He could certainly shake up the entire Eastern Conference race. A guy who became available today, Sap, which is an interesting name that I don't know a lot of people are expecting. DeMar DeRozan is now being talked about in some trades. How do you feel about DeMar DeRozan?
DeMar DeRozan, he's always going to be remembered as the guy who was, multiple-time All-Star in Toronto, got traded for Kawhi Leonard. The Raptors always kind of disappointed in the postseason with DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry, and they were best friends. As soon as he went to San Antonio, Kawhi goes to Toronto, and they win the championship. So it almost has the feel of he just missed it, and he's a really good player. He's not an all-star anymore. He's more of a mid-range guy, although he's improved his 3-point shooting. He's a real good character guy. I mean, he's an easy guy to root for. He's had some mental health issues off the court, and is a big time spokesman for combating that. Look, the Lakers, I think, were in play for him in the off season or early in the season. Yeah, I think he'd be a nice fit with them. But San Antonio going to trade DeMar DeRozan to the Lakers. That's the other thing. Sometimes you want to trade players to the other conference, and that happened with Kawhi Leonard. Like, we're not trading Kawhi to the Lakers. We're going to send him to Toronto. We're going to send him out of the country, in fact.
Right.
And that
Yes.
could be going back to Kyle Lowry. Kyle Lowry, I mean, does Toronto, and I think Masai Ujiri is the best executive in all of sports. Is he going to gift wrap Kyle Lowry to Philadelphia or Miami and make them a contender for several years when he's trying to rebuild Toronto? That may not be the case.
Yeah, it's a fair thing to look at.
Yeah, DeRozan's a fine player. He's got to go to a contender, though, because you're not going to build around him anymore. He's past his prime. The one team he won't go to is the Clippers. They've already got enough mid-range shooters with Kawhi, and Paul George can score in that zone as well. So, look, San Antonio has had a nice season this year. I mean, they're in playoff contention. And
yeah, but they know what they are, right? They know that they're not competing for anything. That's why he's available, is because they know what they are and they know what they aren't, and what they aren't are legitimate contenders.
They're not.
They're rebuilding, but they're trying to do that win and rebuild thing at the same time. So I think they look at it as, if we can get some young players or picks for him, add to the young players that we already have, give them more playing time. That's the best route for them. So DeRozan, I could totally see being moved, because I don't think you have to actually overwhelm the Spurs with an offer for him.
No, I mean, he's again in his 30s. He's kind of fallen out of favor with the way the game is played. He's not a great 3-point shooter.
He's a mid-range guy.
But he's a mid-range guy.
20-point-a-game scorer this year, though. So, I mean, he can score.
He's still a quality player. So there'll be someone out there that thinks that, he can put them over the top. I keep bringing up Portland and Denver, because they need that type of player. He's a good defensive player as well. Maybe he fits in with them and can be a nice piece for them. And San Antonio is the one team, if they can accumulate draft choices, they're so good at the draft and developing players. Like, they're really good at that, right? They'll
right, that's what they want to do. They'll take second-round picks and turn them into good players.
They do. I mean, Ginobili was a second-round pick. I think Parker was a late first-round pick.
Very late,
Obviously, Duncan was the first pick in the draft. That kind of set the tone the entire organization, but they're really good at that stuff. To this day, I cannot believe that the San Antonio Spurs did not draft Draymond Green when he came out, because he would have been perfect for them. I mean, he's a bit of a hothead. I don't know if Pop could have controlled him, but in terms of the player versatility, oh my God!
If he was from France, they would have taken him.
That's right. They unlike the Celtics, the Spurs are good drafting those players from France. The Celtics, not so much.
No. So I would not be surprised to see DeRozan, Rudy Gay, another guy who's on the Spurs, who's sort of like, he's good, but doesn't really fit into what they want to do anymore.
How old is he?
1,002. He's available. LaMarcus Aldridge looks like he's going to be bought out. So I would expect the Spurs probably to be pretty active, because again, they're smart. They're not going to fool themselves into thinking, hey, maybe we can make an actual run at it this year. They want the picks. They want young players. They want to give their young players more playing time. So DeRozan being mentioned right now to possibly Miami, who's in the mix for everybody. It seems like Chicago seems hell-bent on making the playoffs for some bizarre reason. So they are in on him too. I would not be surprised at all to see him get moved.
Yeah, no. And that's going to be one that flies under the radar, because it doesn't seem like a sexy move. Everybody's talking about these other players, but that could be a player that can really help teams like Portland, Denver, Miami, because they're all in that second tier, and they're trying to get up to that first tier, and they need to make some sort of splash by Thursday at 3 p.m.
Right. Other guys that I'll just, rattle off some names for you right now, Sap, that have been talked about. Lauri Markkanen, Otto Porter available for the right price in Chicago. Again, they're trying to make the playoffs, so they're not going to try to downgrade. They're trying to set those two guys for an upgrade in player. Maybe they swap them for DeMar DeRozan. I'm sure the Spurs would love Lauri Markkanen. He's from Finland. Perfect. They love those.
Perfect guys. I like that player. I do. I like Markkanen. I think he's a pretty versatile big. I think he's a better version.
He hasn't improved the way people thought he was going to.
I know. I mean, I think he's a better version of Kelly Olynyk, a big guy who can stretch the floor, more athletic, little better defender. But
people were hoping he'd be more Dirk Nowitzki than Kelly Olynyk.
Yeah, there's only one Dirk, really, when you think about it. And You try to replicate one of the all-time great players is difficult to do.
Another guy who's available that I'm a little surprised to hear is Malcolm Brogdon potentially available in trades. The Pacers don't really seem to know if they want to go forward or tank the rest of the season. So I think basically anybody, maybe outside of Sabonis, is available. That means Miles Turner, who's always in trade rumors, also available. Is Malcolm Brogdon a piece that could put a team over the top, Sap?
Again, I think he's best served. I mean, he's a pretty high-paid bench guy, but could you picture him as a sixth man, like coming off the bench?
I think he's good at everything. I really like good. Brogdon.
He's a 50-40-90 guy. There's not a lot of those guys, right? So, yeah, he's another player.
He's like a jack of all trades, master of none sort of guy. But really, he's good at, like you said, 50-40-90, so he could shoot, which is, a very desirable skill.
When all else fails, if you can be a 50-40-90 guy, that's pretty good. We'll put you on our team. So, yeah, another guy the Lakers could be interested in. They need scoring, Jet.
And I don't think a lot of these guys are going to go for extremely expensive, like Brogdon, Porter, Markkanen, Oladipo, DeRozan. I don't think they're going to go for outrageous asks. Like, I don't think any of these teams are looking for, a heist in these trades. No,
they're looking for draft capital. That's the problem with the Lakers. They don't have any. Like, Brooklyn doesn't have any, but Brooklyn really doesn't have to really make any moves. They just need KD back healthy, which we expect, sooner rather than later. So, the draft capital is nice. I think in like 6 years, the Rockets and the Thunder are going to control the entire draft at some point, right? They're going to have like half the first round picks and like the 2027
the difference is the Rockets aren't well run and the Thunder are, so the Rockets will botch it.
Yeah, they figure out how to screw that
up. So those are the lists. Another one I forgot when I was talking about the Raptors, Sap, is Norman Powell is set to become a free agent and is supposedly going to make around $20 million a year. Don't know why you would pay him that much, but he's getting a lot of interest. I also think the Lakers would be in on him too.
Man, Norman Powell, $20 million a year he's going to be making. That's my whole point is like you're paying. I mean, $20 million a year now in the NBA is not a big deal. Although the cap is what, $110 million. So we're talking about like we're talking like 17% of the cap for Norman Powell. Like that just kind of boggles my mind. But again,
he's 27 years old. He's coming off of a career year right now where he's averaging almost 20 points, 19 and a half points a game. Shooting numbers are really good. He's shooting 44% from three and 87% free throw shooter. So, close to that 50-40-90 type guy.
Yeah, and again, I always am leery of guys that put up these huge numbers on teams that aren't even contending.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's almost like no one's watching. So, yeah, I mean, I'm going to put up 20 points a game like no one even knows you're doing it. Malcolm Brogdon, we've seen in the postseason, right, with Milwaukee and with Indiana. So we've got an idea that he can play on the big stage. We don't know about Powell. We don't know about, Markkanen is a guy that plays in an organization that hasn't made the playoffs for many years. So that's what I'm always leery about. Yeah, if you're just the only guy on the team or you're the best or second best player on a team and you're averaging 18 and shooting 40% from three because no one covers you or you're hitting a couple of threes late in a game, in garbage time. And it's different than actually seeing the player. Just going through their stats can be somewhat misleading.
Yeah, so that's the latest in trade rumors. The same buyout rumors remain. LaMarcus Aldridge and Andre Drummond, the two most talked about players who have, name brand recognition. Drummond, the teams that are in on him are the teams you would expect, the Lakers and the Nets. As far as Aldridge, the Heat seem to be the leader for him. I don't really know what Aldridge has left in the tank. The Blazers also talking about a reunion where he'd come back to the team that he started with. He's still very close with Damian Lillard, and I think he may still even have a house in Portland. So they were another possibility. It seems like based on the teams that they would go to, Drummond would be the far more impactful signing of those two guys in the buyout market, even though Aldridge, you kind of think of him as this perennial all-star who can have drain it from 18 to 20 feet and score in the post. He doesn't have as much left as what Drummond does.
No.
And so we'll see if those guys do end up being bought out and where they end up going. And ultimately the buyouts could be more impactful than the trades on the deadline.
Yeah, especially Drummond, because I think the Lakers are going to go for him if he's available through this mechanism, because he's still a guy who's averaging 13 and a half rebounds a game. They need size. They need scoring. They need a lot right now. I mean, the Laker team as it's constituted right now would be a lottery team, right? Without LeBron and Anthony Davis, they'd be one of the 6 or
Yeah, they'd be
7 worst
bad.
teams in the league. Yeah, so,
Very
I mean,
bad. Yeah.
they need to they can't just punt on these next 12 to 14 games when LeBron's out and go 3-9, because they could fall to 7 or 8. And I don't want to see them there because, again, even if you're 7 or 8, you've got to take part in that play-in tournament or whatever you want to call it, and you got to win one game. You get 2 chances to win one game. That's scary. I'm sorry. That's very scary, especially in the West, which is so deep. So want to see them still maintain top 6, which I think they can. They may add a piece at the trade deadline, the buyout market. Just even if you go close to 500 over the next 12 to 14 games, then when LeBron comes back, and you would think Anthony Davis is already back, then they'll be up to speed to be where they have to be.
Right. So we'll see what happens, and we're going to keep you updated tomorrow and on deadline day of the latest rumors and things that happen. But before we finish the show today, Sap, let's go to our top 5 power rankings in the NBA. You want to kick us off?
Sure. This is very fluid, too. And it's a good sign that there's a bunch of teams that move in and out of the top 5. I mean, we kind of think it's going to be Lakers and Clippers in the West and Brooklyn and Philly in the East, and it probably will be. But as of now, there's a lot of teams that are playing really good basketball. Number 5 for me is a team with the best record in the NBA, the Utah Jazz. I'm still not sold on them. I'm just not. I mean, they went into Philadelphia and Joel Embiid destroyed Rudy Gobert. They beat the Jazz, the 76ers did. So I've got the Jazz at number 5. I think they're another team that needs to make a move for a wing defender. So I have them at number 5. I've got Milwaukee at number 4. They're 28-14. They've won 7 in a row, 9 out of 10. They're a completely different team with Jrue
I've been
Holiday.
telling you, right, Sap? Look out. That
Look
is
out.
an under-the-radar team.
Very quietly, because this is going to be the year they'll probably be the 3rd seed, although they're not that far behind Philly for the top seed. And Giannis is playing at an MVP level. His numbers are pretty similar to what they've been the last 2 years. So watch out for the Bucks. I've got them at number 4. I've got Philly at number 3. They've maintained a pretty high level without Joel Embiid. They're 30-13, best record in the Eastern Conference, 8-2 the last 10. So they're holding on with Embiid out. And again, could be a blessing in disguise. Embiid out for a few weeks. When he comes back, that little R&R can help him going down the stretch of the season and into the postseason. Number 2, this may surprise you, have the Phoenix Suns, 28-13, second best record in the Western Conference. They're 20-5 in their last 25 games, Jet. I mean, that's impressive. That's a long period of time to be pretty dominant. They've beaten pretty much every good team they've played. The only team they lost to was to Brooklyn. They had a huge lead in that game, and they, kind of fell asleep in the fourth quarter. Number 1, I've got Brooklyn, 29-14, 8-2 over the last 10. Harden's vaulting up to the top 2 or 3 in MVP because Durant's been out 19 games this year. Kyrie's going on another sabbatical.
By the way, the Kyrie thing, he does this every year. It's his birthday week. Yes. He always takes his birthday off.
That's right.
No, everybody's saying it's family reasons. It's not family reasons. It's his birthday. He's done it before. He takes his birthday off. Stop saying it's family stuff. He just doesn't want to play on his birthday. It's ridiculous. This freaking guy, man, I'm telling you. I just can't.
He's Odell Beckham. How many times have I told you Kyrie Irving, Odell Beckham Jr., same guy? Incredibly talented. I mean, I'd pay to watch them, but can you really count on them? Are they reliable? That I didn't even know that. That's right, because I think Kyrie and Gordon Hayward have like the same birthday. But it's I think March 22nd or whatever.
It's ridiculous.
That is crazy.
He does it every year.
Used to kind of do that too, right? Didn't
Rondo threw himself a birthday party in L.A. and missed the game? Yes.
That awesome. I mean, that's the NBA. That's why we love it, though. It's very, very interesting. Yes, I got Brooklyn number 1. I have the Lakers, the Clippers, the Blazers just outside there. Look, the Lakers without Anthony Davis and LeBron are a lottery team. With them, I still think they're the team to beat. And that's the difference when you lose the best player in basketball and Anthony Davis is a top 6 or 7 player. So that's my top 5. Utah 5, Bucks 4, 76ers 3, Phoenix 2, and Brooklyn 1.
So I do it a little bit differently, Sap, in that I told you this before. My rule is with the defending champion until they have a definitive reason to be knocked out of the top 5 and not in the conversation, I keep them in. So I had the Lakers at 5. It's sort of like a token, like a holding spot, right? Obviously not without Davis and LeBron. They're not a top 5
No.
team. Nobody believes that. But it's just my personal rule when I'm doing power rankings that I give you some due deference as the defending champion. So they'll hold on to that 5 spot until LeBron and Anthony Davis come back. I'm not taking them out. Then at 4, I have the Suns for all the reasons you just said. They're playing really great basketball. Their ceiling, I'm still a little bit dubious on. Maybe they'll be buyers at the trade deadline. That could certainly help bolster their chances in the West. At 3, I have the Sixers. They're a completely different team when they have Joel Embiid versus when they don't have Joel Embiid. So they're at 3. Embiid's not back for a little while, so they could. I wouldn't be surprised if they dropped out, maybe swapped with the Bucks, who I have just on the outside looking in. But right now, until they start losing more games, I have the Sixers. At 2, I have the Jazz, just by virtue of having the best record in the NBA. They don't really lose games. I expect them to lose in the postseason, but right now it's the regular season rankings, so they're there, and we have the same 1. I think you'd be hard-pressed to pick a different team at 1 right now besides the Nets. I mean, they're dominating without their full quadre of talent. They don't have their whole roster together, and they're still playing terrific basketball. So,
you know what's interesting about Brooklyn? Now, Kevin Durant, at least I think, is the second best player in basketball, right? I mean, I think LeBron's 1, KD is 2. In the last 2 years, Kevin Durant's played 19 games. Brooklyn's 12-7 in those 19 games with Kevin Durant. They're 17-7 without him. They have a higher winning percentage without him than with him. And my man Colin Cowherd, who I think is the best in the business, he has said this. He goes, Kevin Durant is a phenomenal player, top 20 player. How valuable is Kevin Durant? I mean, he's great. We think he's the second best player in the league, but the team is, done just fine without him.
Hard to say.
Actually the most valuable guy on that team is Harden.
Yeah, hard to say because Durant was he was the alpha guy on that Thunder team when he first started. They were very talented, and they did get to a finals, win 2 games, and then they got the gentleman's sweep after that. They lost 4 straight, I believe, to the Heat.
Yeah, they lost in 5 games. They won the first game.
They lost in 5. I thought they won the first 2. Oh, they won.
No, they won the first game, and then the Heat beat them the next 4. Well, don't forget when he left Oklahoma City, Westbrook went ahead and won the MVP, and I think they won 46 games. They were a 5 or a 6 seed. It's not like they fell apart when Durant left.
No,
it's not like when LeBron leaves, the team falls apart, right?
Right. I think in terms of the record with Durant this year, I look at it more as they're trying really hard to get him back into form and make sure he's involved in the offense so he can, get his sea legs back.
Yeah.
Maybe forcing some stuff. Not so much that he's not having an impact on winning, but more that they're focused on the long game here of making sure come playoff time, he's not rusty and he knows how to play with his teammates and, can kind of get back to the NBA speed of things. So I don't think it's necessarily that he's in, they don't play as well because he's in. It's more that they have a more deliberate approach as opposed to a fluid approach. And what they'll look like in the playoffs with Durant is a lot different than what they'd look like in the regular season with Durant.
Yeah, no, that's totally valid. It's just that I've always felt that, look, he's phenomenal. I have him as the 16th greatest player in the history of the sport. I've said this a million times, and I'll say it a million more times. He has the most varied, unstoppable offensive game I've ever seen. Wilt Chamberlain was unstoppable in the post, and Kareem had the hook shot, and Jordan was phenomenal. But this kid can score from 40 feet in. In every way imaginable. Watch Kyrie Irving, right? And we watch Kyrie Irving in amazement as a player. Kevin Durant's like a 7-foot version of Kyrie Irving. We quite have the handle that Kyrie Irving has, but in terms of he's actually a better 3-point shooter than Kyrie Irving. His mid-range game is as good as Kawhi Leonard's. He's great finishing at the basket. He can
score from anywhere on the court. Right.
There's a guy. If you want to have, I'll tell you what. Take all the great players in the history of the NBA and let's have a horse contest. My money's on Kevin Durant over everybody.
I can see why. It makes sense. And if you're, again, going back to the value to what you're saying Colin Cowherd said, it's hard because he's been on such good teams. He hasn't been on a crap team since. So if you were to throw him on a bad team and say, you're the guy, no other help, like LeBron kind of when he was on the first iteration of the Cavs team,
and even his last year in Cleveland, there wasn't much there.
that's how you would be able to gauge it. But he's
Right.
never gonna be on that team.
No.
This is his last couple of years of his prime, and he's gonna be playing them with James Harden and Kyrie Irving. So we're never gonna really know the answer to that question definitively because he's been on 3 teams in his career. They've all been laden with talent.
Yeah, no, and he's fine with that. He's comfortable with that.
He's
and
never been on a team
to,
where he didn't have an MVP teammate, Sap.
No, after his second year or third year second year in the league, in comes Westbrook, who becomes a superstar. Like a year later, in comes Harden, and you get these 3 incredible players. They do get to the finals, and then have to move on from Harden, and then they chose Westbrook over Durant, which is a mistake that Oklahoma City made. But yeah, we don't know that. With LeBron, his first 7 years in Cleveland, it was him carrying a franchise. They did get to the finals.
You've seen him drag teams. And we saw Jordan early in his career drag some teams.
Yeah. I mean, when he started winning series and advancing, he had Scottie Pippen, who, was a great player. But yeah, it's just interesting to see that that's different. You could be great, but not as valuable as some other guys. Like I think Chris Paul's becoming one of those guys that's clearly valuable to a franchise, right? Because look at what he's done in Phoenix. I mean, a lot of those pieces were there last year. They haven't made the playoffs in 10 years, and all of a sudden, I've got them ranked number 2. They have the second best record in the Western Conference. The big difference is Chris Paul.
He's a plug in and improve the team automatically. That's what he is.
And Durant also is a plug-in guy in terms of he's got to be one of the easiest guys to play with. Like, he doesn't need to take a lot of shots to put points up. Yeah, not at all. He's not like – I mean, I think LeBron's probably tougher to play with than Durant because LeBron – is in charge of everything. I mean, he's the coach, the GM, the best player, the point guard, the power. He's kind of everything. Was Durant can just go out there and take 20 shots, hit 12 of them, 4 of them being from 3, get to the free throw line, and you look up and go, he's got 36. Like, I didn't even really notice him taking a lot of shots, so he's easy to play with. That's why he, Steph, and Clay, that trio was unbeatable because they were all such efficient.
Right, and Draymond was happy being the 4th guy.
And Draymond was good cleaning up the mess. Yeah, I mean, that team was perfectly constructed. And again, the leader of that team was still Steph because that's his franchise. It was never going to be Durant's franchise. It was always Steph's team, and Steph was why I think he's such a great player, a greater player than Kyrie Irving is because he's a total pro, mature, and he can just play well with others. Kyrie, is infuriating. And happy birthday to Kyrie. I think he turns 29, so...
Yeah, but that's just his age on Earth years. Who knows what he is in Venus or Mars.
Odell Beckham Jr. I've told you this for years. They're the same
guy. At least Odell Beckham Jr. shows up. He's not skipping out on he's not leaving the team for large swaths of the season.
Well, he gets hurt a lot. He does play football.
He does get hurt a lot.
He gets a little bit different. But the whole thing whereas it's just like a sideshow, right? Like you go watch Odell Beckham Jr. to watch him in pregame warmups. He does more in pregame warmups than he does in the game.
He's a good field goal kicker. I've seen him knock 40-yarders.
He's a phenomenal athlete. He could probably play quarterback in the NFL. I saw him throw a pass last year against Dallas. I'm like, holy crap.
Yeah.
This guy can do anything you ask him to do. But it's a basketball podcast, but I wanted to bring Odell Beckham Jr. in because maybe he'll end up with the Packers. That would be my hope.
He also could be a good basketball player, too. I'm sure he could.
I'm sure.
He dunks on the goalpost. He could probably have no problem in the NBA.
Sure, he's pretty good at it.
So that'll do it for this trade deadline watch for the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. We'll be back tomorrow with more of the latest news and rumors because there's always a ton of rumors. Most of them don't pan out, but it's still fun to talk about them. So anything that breaks, we will be sure to be right on top of. So make sure you listen tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. This is the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented as always by Full Press Coverage.